Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm here with my old friend from social media, but new friend talking to in person, Matt Beaudreau. And depending whether you're Canadian, French, American, Californian, because I feel like those are two different things these days, you might pronounce it differently. So we'll put his name as linked to all of his social media on the show notes and everywhere else. And Matt and I kind of run in the same circles, but have never really had the chance of hanging out together. We know a lot of the same people from Apogee Strong and Front Row Dads Foundation, or Front Row Dads Group Foundation, Front Row Foundation, all of these same people, and we've never really had the chance to talk. But I started following you on social media, and from founder of Apogee Strong, which we're going to get into that, founder of several Acton Academies, which are kind of outside the box way of thinking about schools. We actually interviewed the Acton Academy founder, who my child is going to just the other day. So that podcast will probably drop a couple weeks before you. You were kind of a phenom in the public speaking world for a while. I know you have a few kids. You just moved out of California. Tell me what I missed in the 60-second Reader Digest version of who Matt is and where you came from.
I think you nailed it, dude. I think we're done. I think the podcast is all set.
Perfect. Shortest podcast ever in the history of the world.
Just wrap it up right there, man. No, yeah, I think that was it, man. I mean, that's kind of what's going on now, and all of that started in education. You know, I've been in the game for a couple of decades, and I always say game very, very intentionally too. So we can go as far into that as you want to go to. So, but
yeah. So I know you as this like bearded, tough guy that's kind of speaking out against the system, against like how we're treating kids and especially young boys, and how, you know, most of the problems in America start at the youth level deterioration of the family, of the education system. So I was kind of shocked to hear that you come from that traditional education system. So can you tell us kind of the hero's journey of where you came from and how you changed your mind and where you're at now? Because I see you got enough gray hair. You must be at least as old as I am in your 40s. So there's a good 20, 30-year story there. Give us the highlights.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I tell people it because I grew up in California, in the Bay Area ish, and had the normal childhood. And I got straight A's, man. I got straight A's all through school, all through high school. And I figured out the game early on. And I always start back there because, again, I use that word game very, very intentionally, right? So I remember sitting in my kindergarten class at 5 years old, looking around at the way they had grouped us together, going, okay, that group over there, they don't think they're very good readers. That's the next level up. This is the table they think are the best readers in the class. So they've put us in this color. So I'll bet they're going to do a bunch of things. I figured that out at 5 years old. And so it was very early on where I figured out how to get my A's without knowing anything, without doing it. I just, okay, what does this teacher want to hear? How do I make this person happy? How do I get this right? So I figured that out early, man. So I got my straight A's all through high school and got done like anybody else. I really focused on, sports and girls more than anything else. And got done and went, well, okay, well, I guess I'm supposed to go to college, right? That's what everybody else is doing. So went to college. Continued to get straight A's, got better at sports, got better at girls, but came out, and I had turned down a job at the White House, believe it or not, but it came out and went, okay, well, man, I have no idea who I am or what I'm good at. Like, I know I have some debt and I have no job, right? So it's that kind of whole thing. But working a couple odd jobs, I ended up at Stanford University and was working there for a few years, and that's where I started to see the game more clearly. I intuitively knew it as a kid in the public K through 12, but being at Stanford and specifically looking at admissions going, wait a second, this isn't the meritocracy that everybody says it is. There's a whole lot of other stuff going on. Well, naively, I go, okay, well, maybe I'm going to start changing stuff for kids and I'm going to go be a teacher, And so then it's the public school teacher. This isn't about kids. I'm going to be an administrator so I can change the game. So I become an administrator. This is really not about kids. This is about money. It's about politics. And so as the further I got into it, the more I just realized, conveyor belt schooling is not about young people. And ultimately, I had kids of my own and I was like, well, where are they going to go? I need to either, homeschool or I need to start something different. And that kind of started me down the Acton Academy journey. So
there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
The first thing is most even college graduates, much less kind of people that have no direction, don't just accidentally end up with a job at Stanford, because Stanford's a pretty prestigious place. I mean, to be a fucking custodian there, you kind of have to have an in or some credentials. So how does one, fresh out of college, odd jobs, not a lot of direction, didn't know that you wanted to go full force into education, how do you accidentally end up at a job at Stanford, and what did that look like?
Yeah. So thankfully, man, I at least had a work ethic, right? I graduated high school at 17 and was determined that I was never going to, one, go back home, two, take another dime from my parents. And that was just kind of a stubbornness I had and a belief that I had. And a lot of that was through, I grew up as a martial artist as well. And that was a big part of that. I was a combat athlete my entire life. So I think that was a lot of the confidence kind of stuff, but that was a big part of it, man. So I put myself through school, working multiple jobs as I did it. Again, turned down that job at the White House literally 2 months before I graduated. So I graduated with no job, but when I did get that first job, which I don't, Abercrombie and Fitch, but
you had washboard abs. You were just looking all hot.
I was in shape, man. I was a fighter, dude. I was in shape, right? So, started working there, which I don't regret for a minute because I made a lot of good friends, and that's where I met my wife.
Nice.
Yep. But I wanted to be the best. I'm managing a freaking Abercrombie or multiple. I wanted to do the best job I could. I had enough pride in myself that I wanted to at least show out and at least be, the best that I could be there. And so that ended up being the habit that ended up proving most valuable, because I ended up helping somebody that I had no idea who I was helping, but I was doing the best I could to try to help him, try to help his family. That ends up being Mark Mastroff, right? And had no idea who he was at the time, but Mark Mastroff is the founder of 24 Hour Fitness, partial owner of the Sacramento Kings. Mark goes, "Hey man, I need you to come work for me at 24 Hour Fitness. I love your work ethic. I love your personality. I love your attitude." So I'm like, "Yeah, man, cool." So I ended up running clubs for Mark for many years. And then the same thing happened. I was training somebody and working with somebody who happened to be the controller for the entire university at Stanford, and said, "Man, I love your work ethic. I love your personality. I can get you a whole lot more money and a whole lot more opportunity. Why don't you come work for me at Stanford University?" And so it was that.
Isn't it crazy? Like, I mean, I get it. Like, if you go to a prestigious college and then you do, an MBA program at a top 10 school, like, there is some peacocking. There is like you're part of the good old boys network from USC that can give you some job openings. But the more successful people I talk to who I want to emulate, the more it's like, oh yeah, I got this opportunity, not because I had a 4-year degree from Cal State LA, but because I worked my ass off and somebody recognized it.
Bingo. And you're not wrong about the ability to potentially make those connections at the university level, right? But it is to a far lesser degree than it ever was. Those good old boy networks don't exist quite the same way that they did before. And there's more opportunities for a young person than ever before to develop the same kind of network earlier, faster, and sure as hell cheaper than doing it through a university now too. So universities can't, hang their hat on that as, well, shit, this is why you should come. Because you can replicate that much more efficiently now.
Right. I was watching something on social media, and it was there for the views, but it was some Gary V-esque type guy, and some dude just like comes up to him and he's like, "Hey man, I've been emailing you my portfolio for 6 months. I've been tagging you on Instagram. Here's my stuff. Da da da. Can I get an intern job?" And it's like, I didn't get the feeling that it was staged, although it looked a little staged. And they're like, "Yeah, call this guy, do this guy. I appreciate the hustle. Like, we'll get you in." So it's like, because of social media, I agree with you. You can create a following, a persona, a personal brand, a connection. I mean, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, will frequently like just retweet or converse with somebody who's online who's probably making, $12.50 an hour, if they've got like good thoughts. So it's never been easier to get connected, but maybe it's never been harder to stand out. I don't know. What are your thoughts on like standing out? Because there's a lot of weak sauce people in America right now. What are your thoughts on like standing out? It probably should be easier to stand out than ever if you have great work ethic, but what gets lost in the maze of social media and all that kind of craziness?
Yeah, it's never been easier for anybody to be great. Never mind a young person. I mean, I always tell them like, you've got more opportunity now than ever before because the bar has been set so ridiculously low for you. Right. And coupled with the cultural expectation that, quote unquote, teenagers aren't going to be worthwhile anyway. So you've got all of that that's working in your favor, young person, because if you can show the opposite, then people are going to take notice. But what happens is, and I'll give you a perfect example from our Apogee program. But what happens is if young people go at it and they try to do it like everybody else is doing it, God, I can't get a job. Okay, what are you doing? Shit, man, I sent my resumes out to 100 people. Okay, cool. Well, Scott, you've been an employer. I've been an employer. I can tell you, if I've got 100 resumes that come across my desk, I don't have the time nor desire to look through 100 resumes.
Yep.
I do not. So if I have to go through it, I'm going to look for an arbitrary metric on how to filter, which a lot of times a college degree for some places ends up being that, right? So why would you put your piece of paper in a stack with other pieces of paper? So let's get in front of the actual hiring managers. Let's actually put together a digital portfolio versus a resume. Let's get an email that's out to them that's not asking for a job, that just goes, hey, I admire you. Here's why. I'm a young person. Here's what I'm doing. Here's why you're my hero. Here's a video of me explaining it that's coming through an email. And here's my digital portfolio. I'd love to take 10 minutes of your time and just ask 3 specific questions. I don't want anything else from you, right? You start making relationships that way, showing yourself as different, and the doors open. And I say, we had a very clear example of this happen simultaneously in the Apogee program. I had a tale of 2 young men that I was working with, one of them 19 at a prestigious university, the other young man 15. The 15-year-old didn't know exactly where he wants to go in terms of, quote unquote, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is a shitty question to ask kids, but he had no idea what he wanted to do. 19-year-old had a very clear understanding that he wanted to go into the financial services industry. In the same week, the 19-year-old says, hey, will you do me a favor? Will you look over my resume? I'm sending this out. I've sent it out to multiple places. I can't get a bite. He's 19. He's putting himself through college. He's a straight A student. He's doing all the quote unquote extracurriculars. He's a musician. He's doing all this stuff, right? I can't get a bite, man. What's going on? During that same week, 15-year-old had done basically what I just said, just to get himself an interview of the CEO of a financial services organization in his hometown. That's all he wanted, was to go in there and go, you're my hero, but it's your work ethic. Here's why. 10 minutes is all I want. He asked those questions. The guy goes, we can go longer. And he goes, no, I promised you 10 minutes. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. If it's okay if I email you just my progress moving forward, I'd love to do it. Here's my portfolio of all the other stuff I'm doing. That financial services firm called him a couple months later and said, hey, I need a young person like you. I'll pay you under the table until you're 18. When you're 18, I'll pay for you to get the relevant licenses, as long as you'll work for me for a year thereafter, and we can see if we can do something, crazy together. Perfect example. Amazing. Same week.
Amazing. So for those that don't know, and I'd say most people don't, explain what Apogee Strong is, what it means, what you're building, kind of who you're involved with. What is Apogee Strong?
Yeah, so Apogee Strong is a brand that Tim Kennedy, a lot of listeners probably know who he is far more than they know who I am, rightfully so. But Tim and I have built this. Tim, if you don't know who he is, look him up, check him out. Former UFC middleweight, one of the top fighters in the world, phenomenal veteran, phenomenal entrepreneur, special forces guy, TV personality. He's a big personality, big guy, but big heart. And that's the most important thing, big character, right? He's a good man. And Apogee Strong is something that we started because we both have networks of really, really good men, and we both have hearts for young men who are not being led into adulthood, into manhood, into what masculinity could be and should be, and traditionally was. So we put together the Apogee Strong program with a few other special forces guys. And it's a 12-month program, projects, a new project every month, a new challenge every month for these guys, new workouts every month, new readings every month. But then they also every week get on mentor calls with, you name it. They're on there with Navy SEALs and generals and actors and musicians and, professional athletes and just the best of the best of the best, these guys pouring into the young men. And then if they complete the 12 months and they pour into themselves, they come out with a digital portfolio that's ridiculous of a bunch of things they've done. They've got a network that's ridiculous for a young man, and they stay in the program in perpetuity for free. no charge. And so, and they've got a closed kind of a workplace thing where they hear from me every single day as well. And that's 365 days a year. So it's a phenomenal mentorship program. And so now we're just adding more verticals that will help more young people. So we're adding, a home education vertical, because we understand that some parents want to educate at home, but they don't know how. Well, this helps the young people if we show them how to do it. We're adding parenting courses. We're adding a fatherhood program. We're adding a college alternative in 2023. So anything we can do to help bolster young folks.
Sounds like to me what Big Brothers and Boy Scouts used to be, but those have just been. Yeah, could have been, should have been, was just so watered down. We're making the decision with my 6-year-old. He's going to an Acton Academy, and I was looking into trail life, Boy Scouts, whatnot, and I was a lifelong proud Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, participated until the day I left for the Army. And in reviewing what that organization is today, I don't want my kid to be anywhere around it. And it's probably right for some kids, but I very much remember a lot of the, we'll just call it man conversations that I was supposed to have as a youth. How do you talk to a female waitress, right? Like, how do you show respect? How do you do this? When is it okay and when is it not okay to throw a punch? All of that stuff came from being surrounded by men. And there's conversations that we had on those trips that just are not had if it's co-ed. And now that Boy Scouts is not Boy Scouts, it's just Scouts and it's co-ed. I'm like, hey, there's a place for my son to go do jujitsu with women and go to school with women and spend quality time with his mom. But there also needs to be a space for him to be a man. And so, we're looking at Trail Life. We're looking at your program, which I think starts at 8 or 9 years old. Is that when you can start Apogee Strong? 10?
Yeah, we really try to keep that one around like 12 or 13 at the youngest. Because we've got just because of the virtual nature of it and developmentally, it's some of the concepts we get into end up being a little more abstract, and you really, developmentally 12, 13 is really kind of the lowest side. And, as far as the guys that are on the calls every week, it goes from probably 12 or 13 up to about 18 or 19, everywhere in between. Those are the guys that are consistent. But I'll tell you what, I did an event, myself and Beaudreau and Mickler and John Lovell and a few of us did an event in Roseville a few months back. And this guy approaches me in the parking lot. He says, "How you doing?" I said, "Good, man. How are you?" I said, "You here for the event?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "But I want to thank you for the Apogee program." I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool, man. Like, no worries. You have a son that is going to get in there." He goes, "No, I'm in there. You've talked to me. I just don't show up to the calls because I'm a grown man. I just never had anybody pour into me, like this and show me how to be a man." He is a police officer in California. And he's going, I needed that kind of mentorship still. So I just don't go to the calls because I don't want to make it weird for the young guys. Yeah. But I catch all the replays, everything you send out, man, I'm on it and it's helping me so much. And it's like, that's rad.
So I saw a clip, and I won't mention their names, either the actor or the kid, just in case it's not for public consumption. But somehow I caught a clip that you had shared or whatnot, and you had kind of a very famous actor on talking to the kids about not being, not giving up and following your dreams and things of that nature. And one of the teenage kids hit him hard with a question about like, well, why did you do this movie for the Chinese government? And I was like, I'm like, instead of being starstruck, the kid was like, no, we're peers here. Like, we're having a conversation. Thank you for pouring into us. But I want to know, like, man to man, you say you stand for this. Why did you do that? And I was like, man, you guys are selecting and growing some really strong-minded men.
That's it. And the beauty of so I know exactly what you're talking about. And the beauty of that was on both sides. One, the young man, and he is just a stellar young human in the I remember exactly who it was. He's in the Midwest. He's a jiu-jitsu stud. He's a BMX stud, but he's just this intellectual young man too, a phenomenal personality. He's got a couple jobs that, he's rocking, and he's 14 years old. And, he won't hold back. He will respectfully ask the hard question that most journalists won't, ask. But likewise, the other side, the through line for all the men that join us to pour into these young men is that they're not just well known, they're good men, right? And so a good man's not going to mind a good hard question. And to that actor's credit, he did not. He's like, man, great question. And he just, here's the reality. Here's what it was. Here's, and it was great and everything was good. And we just kept on rolling. He didn't mind that question at all. He actually, he shot me a text later and he's like, that was my favorite question of the whole thing. I love that the guys had the balls to do it because he's a good man.
That's awesome, man. So I want to go back and we're going to circle back around to Apogee Strong and some of the Acton Academies, but I want to hear again, this hero's journey of, teacher to admin to like, oh my God, like none of this is working in favor of the kids. And I try, I put my tinfoil hat on once in a while and I go a little overboard, but when it comes to, are people being evil or are they just being ignorant? Are people being intentionally destructive or are they just stuck in a pattern that this is how it's existed for 40 or 50 years? So we're not going to rock the boat. We're just going to keep doing the same thing. And we can talk either specifically about the district you were in or the district I was in, which is LA Unified School District, the biggest public school district in the country, which is why we left that area because I didn't want my kids going to that school. Or we can talk about education overall nationally, or we can talk about the Department of Education. I don't care. Having lived in that world for over a decade or two, is it evil? Is it ignorant? Is it they're just stuck? Do people come in with the best intentions and then they just get beat the fuck down? Like what is going wrong with our current, I'd say, elementary, junior high education? Because I kind of feel by high school and college, kids are doing what they're going to do. They're on a path. They're into girls. They're into sports. They're intellectuals. Like, my mom told me one time, she's like, yeah, dude, when you hit 16 and got a driver's license, I was like, I hope I did a good job because that's about all I got to give you. Like your schoolwork is harder than I can handle. I have to trust you with the car. And you're basically a man. You can impregnate a girl if you're going to be irresponsible. So I got nothing left for you, son. And she, of course she didn't tell me that until I was in my 20s. But yeah. I'm just wondering that K through 7th, K through 8th, which are the most formative times of a human being's life, what is going wrong?
Yeah. So it's quite the multifaceted and nuanced answer. You asked, is it evil? Is it ignorance? Is it people stuck in a pattern? The answer to all that is yes. It's all of that, right? So you've got, so I always preface any of my conversations around school with this, that people miss because people get very emotional. And I understand that. So I want them to hear my heart first. If you are a good human who is a teacher and who is a school administrator, I am on your team. I am on your side. If you are a parent that sends your kids to public school, I am on your team. I am on your side. I am not picking sides and looking at somebody and saying, you're my enemy because we think differently. That's not the way I roll. And that's what's gotten us into a lot of the problems that we've gotten into, right, as a society. Right. So I always say that right there. So is it evil? We have to understand where school came from in the first place, right? It's essentially this Prussian model that was designed for, the Industrial Revolution, right? So you needed good, obedient workers that could be trained to rock the factory floor and do it without really questioning authority and without really finding a better way to do things. Smart enough to follow directions, not necessarily quote unquote smart enough to challenge authority. It's not an accident that it doesn't look any different now, even though we are, 100 and some odd years removed. So that conveyor belt model is still at its core designed around obedience. It has zero. And in fact, I would say it's the antithesis of human development. It is the antithesis of it. It is not meant for people to become educated. To be educated, education means to draw out. It means to draw out the unique parts of each person and find out what their genius is, right? That's education. What we have is schooling, which is a system to train, forever obedient people. So that's the system itself. Now I can say that because it's soulless, right? So the system itself is if you don't want to say evil, it's anti-human. We'll say that. Now, there are people in power who understand that. And your teachers' unions, you talk about LA Unified, I can tell you right now, all of the teachers' unions are mafiosa in nature. They just are. There's too many, money, power, politics right there. And so it is, let's keep the system the way it is because one, we can indoctrinate. And everybody's up in arms about the indoctrination stuff that's going on, rightfully so. That's a huge thing that all parents should be aware of, that indoctrination is there, regardless of, well, I'm in a small town district, or, oh, the teachers here are okay, cool. Then maybe it hasn't gotten there yet, or it's just flying under the radar a little bit, but it's on its way.
Right.
Sneakiest part is, again, the habits. You mentioned the formative years of development, right? The sneakiest part of conveyor belt schooling is that we send our kids off at 5 years old, and then for the next 12 years, or if they go on to, college, another 4 or 5, whatever that is, the habits that they are building are, again, the antithesis to what you want for a growing individual. So even if they're at the quote unquote best schools with the best teachers, they are building habits of obedience. They are building habits that tell them that life works in subjects that are all disjointed from one another. That's horseshit. That tells them that they should only be interacting with people of their age, that there is such thing as a quote unquote grade level, or ahead or behind. None of that is real. None of that is transferable into the real world. It's all a facade. It's all garbage. But I'll tell you what, if you have got a habit, if I have got a habit that has been perpetuated for 12 years, 15 years, 16 years, how hard is that habit to break?
That's exactly virtually impossible.
Virtually impossible. So we are building that mindset into them. And most people in this country have gone through that same thing and been programmed that exact same way. So when you say, are people just kind of stuck in this rut, in this system? Yes, they're stuck. Schooling as we know it, because we all grew up with this kind of model, has become a religion in our country. And it is ridiculously hard to shake a religious belief that is that heavily ingrained. That's what we're dealing with, right? Yeah. And you got a lot of good new teachers who come in. I'll tell you what, in California, I think it's like 50% of new teachers come into the job, and they leave the profession, not the state, not the school district. They leave the profession within 3 years, never to return, because they see what the system is. They do come in altruistically, but they see how handcuffed they are and how you can't really do what's right for young people, and they take off.
It's interesting you use the word religion. So I'm going to have Chris look this up because I don't want to lie, but I'm pretty sure I had read this article about LAUSD from about the late 70s, early 80s, to around 2004, 2005, and I think I'm going to get this number right, spent $1 billion on ESL, English as a second language. So instead of like my parents' generation, where somebody comes from Mexico or India or Singapore, it doesn't matter, well, Singapore speaks English, or China, they come into the United States, you put them full immersion in the classroom day one, they sink or swim, they learn English, da-da-da. Well, we wanted to be kinder, gentler, and multicultural and stuff. So LAUSD was one of the pioneers of ESL, English as a second language. So they would send the kids half the day into, learning in their native tongue, and then they would come back and try to do some curriculum in English and whatnot. And 30 some odd years and $1 billion later, there was a negative correlation between ESL and the ability to learn English, assimilate, go to college, finish college, get a good job. And they finally just kind of quietly, shelved this program that it was a religion, because anybody looking at my parents' generation growing up in California schools in the 60s and 70s, it's like, oh yeah, Bernie Leon moved from Mexico, Vicky Nishinaka moved from Japan. Like, it was a really uncomfortable year, but they speak perfect English and they're super productive members of society, right? And now it's like now you've just prolonged this ability to assimilate, to learn the language, to get a better job, to learn in the native tongue, which is English. And it had to be a religious belief, because I have to believe 5 or 10 years in, they knew it wasn't working. They had to know in the 80s it wasn't working, but they spent 20 years and hundreds of millions of extra dollars with a religious belief in, like, this program must be right because it feels good.
Well, and the problem is this is a long tail play too. So the takeover of the teachers unions happened 60, 70 years ago. And so it was a long tail effort of how do we slowly break this entire thing down and let that bleed into society. So, I mean, this is a bigger, and, again, the tinfoil hat, whatever, you can say whatever you want. But the reality is, I was a teacher. When was the first time that I saw some of these union docs? I don't know, it was probably 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And I went, hey, everybody, by the way, we're going to start having gender issues coming into the schools, because that's part of the long tail game. We're going to start downplaying the need for dads, and that's going to be very prominent in the schools. It was all there, man. It was all there, all written out well before any of this stuff started happening. And people, that'll never happen. It'll never happen in our schools. Right. It'll never happen.
Right. Because they'll get into the real world, and then they'll figure it out, and they'll realize you got to turn a profit, and they'll realize that putting whatever he, she, they in the bio or the signature line is just a distraction. It's just like a signaling device to let other people know like what tribe you're with. That will all fall apart when they get into corporate America. But the problem is, kindergartners go to high school, go to college, then they enter the job market, then they take over that arena with the same kind of craziness.
Same kind of mentality. Yep. And they say, yeah, that's exactly right, man. And so that's why, when I was traveling and doing as much speaking as I was getting hired to go speak about young people and how do we find good young people? How do we help lead, manage, recruit? How do we help them not suck? The prevailing through line of why I was getting hired was, hey, we've got a bunch of these college grads, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, whatever. They suck. We want to fire them all. Help us to unsuck them. That's it. They know how to play school, but they're emotional wrecks. They weren't effective at whatever their role was, right? They're like, no, I'm supposed to raise my hand to ask if I can go to the bathroom, and I need my rubric, and they can play school, which again, doesn't transfer to life.
Right. Well, it definitely doesn't transfer to life now where, I was talking about this the other night with one of our interviewees, that it's like information has pretty much been democratized thanks to Google. There's nothing in the world you can't find out for free. So now it's these other life lessons of knowing how to interact with people and knowing how to ask better questions and kind of think outside of the box. That all goes away, to your point, if at 18 years old you have to raise your hand for permission to go to the bathroom. Like that doesn't breed a human being who can think outside of the box and communicate effectively.
That's exactly right. I mean, he's had 13 years of doing that exact thing.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. And like I said, we interviewed James Lomax, who was the founder and financial backer here of Acton in Henderson. We interviewed him. So some people might be familiar with this in the Acton, Acton, not acting. That's the antithesis of what we want to do. Yeah. Acton, Acton Academy. How do they strive to fix these problems?
So the best way, because it's such a multifaceted approach. The best way I can say it is it's a microcosm of real life, so that those skills are developed, which are then easily transferable. You go into the quote unquote real world while you're at Acton Academy, right? So there's not this harsh, like, wait a second, I've been playing school and now I've got life and all the expectations of, can I communicate? Can I lead? Can I problem solve? Can I adapt? Can I convince somebody else of something? Can I, all of those things that we face as adults on a day-to-day basis, that's status quo on an Acton campus. It's a microcosm of the real world. So it is very much not school in the least, right? So all of the systems that are there are help. And what's cool, man, is not a, I get really excited about it because I know the power of it, but people hear me, and a lot of times what they'll hear. So again, I have to be very intentional with my words. They hear it's a utopia. They hear it's a panacea. They hear it's perfection. That'd be just as dangerous as the shit show of conveyor belt schools, right? You don't want that either. It's not a Stepford program, right? Where it's this utopia that's not it either. Right. Again, it's a microcosm of life, meaning there's going to be challenges. There's going to be disagreements, meaning there's going to be deadlines, and you're going to be struggling to hit those, and something's going to happen, and somebody's going to make a bad decision, and you're going to have to figure that out. And there's going to be hard conversations, and you're going to have to fire somebody, and you're going to be running a business, and you're going to be responsible for something else on campus. And somebody else is going to be counting on you, and you might blow it. And all of that stuff is going to happen there in an environment where you can fail forward, so that when you make those failures and you learn those lessons, you're not now missing out on your mortgage payments or ruining the relationship with your wife or your kids. You're making those mistakes in this environment where the stakes aren't as high. And that's a beautiful thing. That's why the Head Start happens for our young people.
I love that. I love that a lot. And, it's funny. I'm just a couple weeks into this Acton experiment with my kids. And it's tough, man, because we were told, hey, just so you know, the first couple of weeks are kind of Lord of the Flies. There might be some kids that get voted off the island because they're not a good fit for the model. There might be some blood because, you know, little boys sometimes like to fight. But we will figure it out together, and we will set a course for a class constitution and a set of rules that we live by. And when the kids set those rules, they're going to be okay, right? And so as a parent who's used to, are they at grade level? How are they going to do on the standardized test? How do I know they're even learning how to read? It's really a leap of faith to be like, I'm putting my most precious commodity in the hands of something that in its current form has only been around about, 12 years. Obviously, this is kind of a return to the old school schoolhouse.
Bingo.
Yeah, there you go.
So, and it's that, man. And not just the old school schoolhouse. It's just the return. I don't care if you think we were created, we evolved, whatever. Humans learn by doing. We always have.
Yep.
Public school, conveyor belt model, that is the 100-and-something-year-old experiment. And it's an experiment that already showed that it failed, right? I don't remember who said it, but somebody said something along the lines of, it would only take one generation of sending our kids to school at 6 months old before you had an entire population of parents who believed wholeheartedly that their kids would never learn to walk unless they went to school, because that's where they learn to walk. You send them at 6 months, and eventually 6 months or a year goes by, and that's where they learn to walk. There's no way they would have done that at home.
Right.
Right. Because that's what our whole generation has done. And that's what we grew up doing. And so that's what we know. That's what we're facing here. So what Acton does is it returns to the reality of humans learn by doing. And the whole school thing is, again, the antithesis of growth for a person.
So by that theory, which I love that kind of analogy, by that theory, what we're really saying is the kids that do come out of public school that are exceptional, or the learning that does go on during K through 12, that's happening in spite of the school, not because of it.
Not because of. That's right. That's exactly right. And that's what I always tell people. Oh, well, you know what? I went to public school, or I went to conveyor belt school, and I turned out fine. I hear that all the time. Cool. First of all, fine sucks. My life is not fine. If I asked you, Scott, man, how are you and your wife? How are you guys doing? And you went, fine. What does that tell? That
tells you everything you need to know.
That's exactly right. How's your relationship with your kids? That's fine. That tells me everything I need to know. So I don't want my life to be fine. I sure as hell don't want my kids' life to be fine. All right. I have no desire for fine. So first of all, fine sucks. Second of all, it's exactly what you said. It's you are doing well or having success in spite of, not because of. So imagine if you had been able to be more intentional about putting yourself on a better trajectory. I put it to people like this. If I fed my kids nothing but McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the first 18 years of their life, at 18, would they still be alive? Yeah, most likely. Most likely they would, and they'd be fine. But is that optimal health for them?
Right.
Sure as hell isn't. And then what's going to happen after that when they go off on their own? Chances are McDonald's is all they know, man. And that's really kind of what they're going to feel comfortable with. It's what they're going to be used to. It's what they're going to want. It's what they're going to crave. It's what they're going to. And so now I'm setting them up in this trajectory where that's the kind of shit they're going to eat for the rest of their lives, right? Imagine if I had been more intentional about making sure they got nothing but good food early on. And then, and experiences around that, it's a different story. It's the same kind of thing with this.
Yeah, what we're really talking about is like the childhood compound effect, right? That's right. I have a really good friend. We come from about the same socioeconomic background. We did Boy Scouts together. He played soccer and I wrestled. Like, we had a very similar childhood, but there was a few little tweaks. Like, his parents set up some responsible money habits and allowances and things of that nature. Mine did not. My parents always fought about money. And there was a few little health tweaks that, like, in their house, there just wasn't juice or soda. It was like, you drink milk or water, that's it, period, the end. And now, fast forward, we're both in our mid-40s. I'm a little fatter and a little less healthy than him. I drink some sodas, I eat some Oreos. He's a fireman in great shape. And even though I've probably out-earned him because of the industry that I chose, he's more fiscally responsible. He's got cooler toys because it just these little tiny childhood compound effects. And of course, every parent's going to screw up their kid somehow. There's some stuff my parents gave me where I've, outperformed him. So I'm not saying that it's just this one-way road, but it's like, it's so powerful. What habits are we instilling in our kids when they're young?
That's right, man. And you're right. No, there are no, whoever's listening to this, dude, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And I get that feedback a lot too. Well, you come across like you're saying you're the perfect parent. Shut up. I never. There's no such thing. But here's where I differ from a lot of people. And I think other people should get on board. I strive to be the perfect parent and I strive to be the perfect husband. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We had a gentleman by the name of Mike Glover, who was on the podcast and came on and talked to the young men of the Apogee. And he was talking about the Sentinels Creed, right? And they're the guys that march in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. And they were talking about how part of that creed is my standard shall always remain perfection. And I love that sentiment. Perfection's unattainable, and it shouldn't be the end all be all and what you're striving for, because that'll create an obsession that'll never happen. You'll never be happy. They'll never, that creates issues. But you can still strive if you're able to separate that and still strive for perfection in all of these areas, understanding that you won't get there, but trying and then accepting your failures on that side. I'll tell you what, changes a whole lot of things.
It's so funny you're mentioning striving for that perfection. I run a coaching group for loan officers, and one of the things I always talk about at our live events, because we do this awesome cooperative learning live event. It's not just, 18 gurus up on stage talking 1 hour after another. I tell them at the beginning, I'm like, hey, just so you guys know, we're going to vomit a lot of information onto you, and you're going to hear stuff from all your peers that they're doing well and this idea. And there's going to be this challenge when you go back to your office of like, I'm doing everything wrong. I've got to institute these 37 steps that I'm not doing. And it's like, just pick something, because a lot of what we're going to talk about is being aspirationally perfect as a loan officer. You'll never get there. It's a constant journey, but you have to at least have that aspiration to get perfect or have the perfect transaction. Or what are you doing? Just like drop out of coaching now and do 3 shitty deals a month and make, $100,000. And that's not a bad living, but I suspect you're all here to do something better. And so it's like, it's having that aspiration without stressing yourself out about, well, I'm not perfect yet. Cause spoiler alert, no one's perfect at anything anywhere. That's right.
And that, I love the way you frame that, man. And that's, we talk to our young men, especially about, there's that concept of balance, right? Everybody wants a buzzword right now is the balance. And how do you work-life balance and all the balance? Balance is peace of mind. And the best way, I think, especially for a man to gain peace of mind, at least in terms of what I found, not just for myself, but for other men that I know and other young men that I work with, is to be ridiculously aspirational, be ridiculously goal-driven, be that guy that is striving to conquer something, be perfect at something and going forward and going and getting it, but having the humility and understanding to know you won't get there and you're not that cool and you're not that special, and balancing both of those in a way that gives you peace, where you don't have oh, woe is me, and oh, life is so, you don't have that. And you don't have, man, I am a stud. Neither one of those things are true, right? But it's having both of those understandings so that you've got this peace of mind and you're, aspirational in that mindset. To me, that, that's where the balance is.
I love that. And just for context, Matt, how long you been married? How many kids you have?
I've been married. This is 2022. So we've been married 14 years, been together 17.
Awesome.
And we have three young heroes.
Oh, that's
11,
awesome.
9, and 6.
11, 9, and 6. All right, cool. Well, maybe you can give me some coaching here on the spot for my 6-year-old. Because if you would have asked me right when we got on this call, how you doing with your son? I'd be like, fine, we're fine. Because I was about to rip his throat out before we got on this podcast.
Join us next week for the second half of this podcast.